Well, good morning, everybody. We made it to Friday. It's Casual Friday and Hangouts and Headlines, and I couldn't be happier for it. It's been a week here at the Hoeg Law Firm, the Hoeg YouTube channel. I don't know if it's been for you, but if it has been, I hope you're excited about talking about nothing like the old Seinfeld commentary used to be. We want to use these Casual Fridays to just have fun, not talk about things like huge lawsuits with tech companies or other things that are otherwise problematic out there in the world. And today we're talking, as you could tell from the thumbnail, about Game of Thrones, but not really Game of Thrones. If you've never seen that show, if you don't like HBO, if you don't want to have any interest in George R.R. Martin or Game of Thrones, I think you're still going to find something interesting here, because what we're going to go over is ostensibly a Hollywood Reporter puff piece. And you've seen these before if you've watched any movies or TV or seen anything that has been covered as marketing for these launches of shows or movies. This is when the studio gives you special access, but probably gets editorial rights or otherwise gets to comment on what's going down in the article itself. And so it's generally pretty positive about whatever your final output is going to be. This one, however, is a little bit more interesting because of the famous ending of Game of Thrones Season 8. And we'll talk all about that. We'll give the background. But first, I want to welcome onto the stream. We've got here Kurt from Uncivil Law. How are you doing, Kurt?
I am doing great. How are you doing, Richard?
Like I said, man, it's Friday, and
Excellent.
I'm stoked about that fact.
I like the part of the introduction where we're just going to hang around and just be loosey-goosey about stuff. That's fun.
Yeah, Casual Fridays. I think the one last week we did like 40 minutes of Hangouts. I don't know if that'll happen today. But yeah, these are supposed to be chill. I really like the concept of having, we've done a lot of important stuff. We've talked about a lot of important things. We talked about insider trading yesterday. We talked about ADA compliance and tech sharing and what makes a public transportation company. We talked about Depp v. Heard. Once a week, folks. I'm trying to do it as once a week. That's it.
The Depp v. Heard stuff will never end.
We're not talking about the fact that a notice of appeal has been actually filed, because that would not make a very long video. A notice has been filed.
Yeah, a notice has been filed. There's not much to say. I did a short about it because I literally didn't have anything more to say. I did 40 seconds on it. That's all there is to say about it.
Yeah,
there's two paragraphs that say we're going to appeal. Moving on to other topics.
Yeah. So that has happened. In case anybody thought they might slip by the 24th and not appeal, I thought there was an outside chance of that. But that appeal is going through. It's going to take a while, and we've got I think Rob at Law and Lumber said we got 3 months before they have to brief it. Mm-hmm. So when they do brief it, chances are we'll talk about it here. Okay. Oh, yeah. And I bet Kurt will talk about it. And I bet a lot of folks that you might otherwise like to follow on YouTube will follow. We'll look at that brief
for the retrial, baby.
Yes. Well, hopefully not a retrial. But yeah. So otherwise, we're just hanging out. We're chilling. I like this. This is my Friday feels right here. Jessica Thompson, too tired for real comment, but using the computer emoji, I think, for engagement with a star explosion emoji.
We'll take it. We'll take it all day long.
Thank you for the engagement. We're going to get through this Friday morning together. It's the 5th in a row for a lot of people during the business week. It's starting to build up. You got that sleep debt. You have that stress debt. We're going to get through it by looking at how HBO makes decisions and how big companies try to get around issues that they otherwise have with their public relations. One of the ways in which they do that, by the way, spoiler alert for this article, is to ignore them and to tell everybody that they're wrong.
Mm-hmm. Baghdad Bobbit. There are no troops in Baghdad.
Mm-hmm. So it's good stuff. Xcomer ZZZ, thank you for the super sticker. Doc McFuzzball, wait, this isn't a qualified immunity deep dive? No, I will save that for my colleagues. I actually think somebody asked me to talk about that. I think there's a case or something that was just accepted or allowed in maybe California against a police officer. No, we're not going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about crazily named people operating in various countries around the world to film for your viewing pleasure, an HBO Max exclusive. Get excited. Of a sequel to a show that burned off so much of its goodwill that I think for one of the most popular shows of the 21st century, it basically vanished. Yeah. You really can't find a lot of commentary online about Game of Thrones.
There was a show called Game of Thrones?
There was a show called Game of Thrones that built up to an epic clash of different forces, powers, philosophies, religions, ideals, and
winter
more.
Winter will come and apparently end within the scope of an episode. Not even that.
Winter is coming. And it was not that big of a deal because it didn't snow very often, because that stuff's hard to film. So yes, Mrs. Hoeg Law apparently taking it upon herself, maybe only on Casual Fridays, maybe as a new feature of the channel here, to actually read off the things that she has been building up, if you follow her on Twitter, as appearing on the Hoeg Law Says bingo card, where apparently one of those is that I read an emoji like a crazy person.
I love it. Hoeg bingo.
Hoeg bingo.
This is
Hashtag
promising.
Hoeg bingo.
Lawtube bingo. This is going well.
Someday Hoeg bingo will trend and it'll be amazing. Sky as a neighborhood says he's on bingo fire emoji, doubling up on that fire concept today, Mrs. Hoeg. I don't even know what I could have possibly said before reading an emoji that would have wound up on the bingo card. It's not like I just went through and said reasonable minds can differ, or this is where the rubber hits the road, or like just a series of phrases that I'm used to saying. I wouldn't do that just to throw off bingo games. But let's see here. X-Comer never watched Game of Thrones, dodges bullets. You did dodge those bullets. You don't have to dodge bullets from the audience.
Yeah, no doubt.
You dodged the Game of Thrones bullets. Because I don't want to give away all my demonstratives here, but this is the review cycle for what happened for Game of Thrones, right? So this is very high. This is just IMDb. This is from actually a couple of years ago. So that's
an overrating for season 7, to be honest. Season 7. Season 7 was not that good.
That's correct. Season 7's overrated here. And you could kind of feel them fall apart off the novels here in 6, but they used a lot of the good twisty bits. So I don't really blame them for holding their score here. 7 is actually, I might have tweeted it. I don't know if I was on Twitter when season 7 actually came out, but I remember my wife had totally checked out. Co-counsel had checked out. She wasn't really a big fan of the darkness of this series the whole time, but she had kind of checked out. And I said to her, as dragons were warping everywhere and there's a zombie dragon and all sorts of things, I said, this might be the stupidest thing that I regularly watch.
And then there was season 8.
Yeah, and then season 8 rolled around, right? I mean, what do you even say about that? So we'll talk about that. But yes, this is just a demonstrative of this thing happening. Now, HBO is going to come out in this article and basically deny that this exists. So it'll be fun. Or more specifically,
it's kind of a mistake, because you might want to realize the mistakes you made if you're going to pour millions upon millions upon millions of dollars into basically Game of Thrones TV adaptation. It might be prudent for you to spend some time and say, like, hey, what hideously wrong, so we cannot do that. But we're just going to choose to deny it and hope that makes it better.
Yeah, well, we'll see. I promised it, and we will see it, because one of the things that happens here is that this is a puff piece. They want to be positive. They want to just say, hey, this new HBO show, it's going to be a prequel series. And they're already talking about a sequel series to Game of Thrones. And they don't really want to hear it. They don't want to hear from anybody that says, look, I loved Game of Thrones. I thought season 1 was fantastic. I was very excited about a book
Theme
that
song
I
kicks
had
ass.
loved. Yeah, season 1 is awesome. And I was excited about a book that I had loved since college.
Oh, you were one of the book people?
I was one of the book people. And I thought they did a good job at adapting the books through like season 4. And then not as much. And then they started getting rid of some of the supernatural stuff. To me, it was clear that they weren't very comfortable with the supernatural stuff. They weren't very comfortable even with the dragons, I would say. And so they wanted to make this kind of grounded medieval fantasy kind of thing. And then as it gets more magical and magical and magical as the books proceed, they were never super thrilled with any of that, would be my guess. But we're reading minds here. We're not actually in the room with D&D. And so the showrunners of Game of Thrones. And so
that was a great episode, by the way, of Lawyers and Dungeons.
Lawyers and Dragons. Thank you, Kurt.
That was
Appreciate it. We're gonna get you on there.
I hope so, man. I used to play. I used to play D&D every Saturday when I was in college, almost every Saturday. And so I played a lot of 3.5 edition. So I'm willing to break out my chops again.
That's right. We're playing 5th edition, right? Yeah. Although realistically, Lawyers and Dragons, if you watch that first episode, is playing lightly ruled make believe.
Yeah,
right. So our GM was, yeah, sure. We'll do that. We'll do that. So no, it's a lot of fun. Brett Cormier, first few seasons of Game of Thrones was great. 100% agree. Then they ran out of Martin material. Absolutely. And it sucked. Martin being the author. If you don't know anything about Game of Thrones, it was based on a series of novels, and a series of novels that is not complete. So imagine, if you will, trying to adapt The Lord of the Rings, and you're adapting only Return of the King was never written. And you get to the end of Two Towers, and you've got like the bullet points that J.R.R. Tolkien had intended for Return of the King, and you try to get those bullet points done in the time that you have decided you have allotted left. And if you just hit those bullet points and you don't do the narrative structure and you don't have the language of the original novel, turns out you can sense a real dip in quality. Then they took 2 years to release a short season 8 that made the entire build-up total crap. Woo! Friday morning, folks. I think that is the tamest Game of Thrones sum up I can do. Well, if you are interested, we do have postmortems for, I believe, every episode of season 8. If you want to see my slow descent into delirium.
Postmortem is right.
Yeah, so I'm excited when the season starts. 6 episodes. They've poured like $100 million into the season. It's going to be big. It's going to be epic. The way this series works is they've put all these forces together, and they finally are arrayed against each other at the finale. And then season 8 happens.
Who has a better story than Brad? Literally anybody.
Crazy Cat Queen. How many people read the books first? I did. And did the show follow well or not worth it? I haven't seen any Game of Thrones. So they followed the books decently enough for about half their run. Then they ran out of material. Then they thought some of the books they got were boring, so they shortened them. And then season 6 kind of uses some of the early plot lines of what would be the next book that George R. R. Martin's never finishing. And then by the time they're on to what would be the grand finale, they're on their own, only with bullet points, and it doesn't really work well. I can't recommend it as experience. I can't really recommend A Song of Ice and Fire, which is the series. It's not called Game of Thrones in book form. But in terms of, if you can just accept that it doesn't have an ending, it's a weird, unfinished work. A lot of the writing is very cool there. It was some of the earliest times that I had seen essentially chapters done from specific perspectives and using kind of almost TV or movie tricks in terms of cuts and fade outs and blackouts to not let you know what was happening in certain sequences. And also it's very well done in terms of keeping track of who knows what. If you really watch a TV show or a movie, one of the problems that a lot of writers have is that they either don't remember or they don't think it's important about what a given character knows compared to the audience. And so one of the things Game of Thrones does really well is in medieval times, you're changing messages by crows and things like this in Game of Thrones. Almost everybody is unaware of everything else that's happening. And so you can have all these machinations and cool plot lines of, hey, I just know more. Or I know that this is true and this is not. And those are all a lot of the stories in Game of Thrones. And when you're reading it, when you're only seeing through somebody's perspective, you get descriptions of things that you actually read about that you don't quite realize is that's how this person is perceiving it. Lots of cool stuff there. So like I said, I can't recommend it because it doesn't finish, but it is well written. He's a very good writer. That's why people are upset at him for not writing. Game of Thrones. Sassy Hoeg. I don't know what I said that was sassy, but it's Friday. We can be sassy here. We're having fun. Season 8 was okay, just too short. So I don't know if the right answer to this terrible food is terrible and I want more of it is the solve for season 8. But I do agree on kind of a fundamental principle that what they appeared to do with season 8 of Game of Thrones was take like the bullet points that they had and just not bother to spend the time building them up, establishing travel times, doing the various things that made Game of Thrones
the travel thing is fun.
Work.
We can fast travel now?
Yes, everybody can fast travel. Everybody is warping around like Elder Scrolls Online, which is awesome. You should play it. But it's not fun when you're trying to engage and immerse in a plot line, and then a dragon you left 3,000 miles away is like there in the next scene, and you're like, after you break the rules so badly that the stakes are destroyed, there's nothing of interest to watch. You can watch, CGI, but we can get that in every movie ever. BG, like many creators, Martian, I like that, can't finish something they have already been paid for. if the show never happened, it would have long been finished. Yeah, I mean, I also think if we want to give Martin the benefit of the doubt, right? I think that you could argue that there is a certain need for a writer to get their story out. That's one of the things that's compelling them to go through the arduous process of putting pen to paper and working all these things out. And to some extent, his story is out. Like, he recognizes that as what was going to be his ending, give or take. I think it is clear it would have been done better with the volume of language and storytelling that would have been in 2 more books. But I'd be willing to guess that he says it's out and people hated it. Now, I don't actually think people hated all of the plot points and twists and character things like that. I think they hated how they were delivered. I think it was just way too superficial. But I could certainly understand as a novelist looking at it and saying, I don't have that drive because the story is known. And also, it's easier to do other things, right? We're going to see him referenced in this article that we're going to talk about, where he's like quasi showrunner helper. And HBO has since decided that they're going to listen to him more, and all these various things that we're going to talk about as flag waving for things to tell folks that we're upset at Game of Thrones and how it ended, to not worry about this one. But yeah, I think it's just easier, right? His books are ridiculous. By the time you get to like Dance of Dragons and things, there's a jillion characters. I have no idea how he keeps track of it, and maybe he doesn't know either. So I guess I'm surprised that the 6th book, Winds of Winter, isn't out in like the decade that it should have been out in. But I don't think we're ever going to get any more novels from George R. R. Martin in Song of Ice and Fire. We'll get things around it. Kurt, do you have any feelings on this?
I remember an interview, or I saw him interview, or at least talk to Stephen King, and he asked Stephen King, "How do you write so much?" And Stephen King's answer is just basically, every day I just write. You know, if I write a 300-page book, if every day I write 10 pages, it'll be done in 30 days. So like every day I'll just go and I'll write like 5 pages, and it'll be done in 60 days. So that's why I write a 300-page book in 2 months. And J.R.R. was like, what? It's like, have you considered trying writing in order to write? That'd be good. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you're interested in writing, Stephen King, as much as I talk about endings, he's not the greatest ender of things. He's really good at beginnings. Has a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful book called On Writing.
Ooh,
a little on the nose.
I did not know this. This sounds promising.
He talks exactly about that process, about getting into the habit of writing, 1,500 words, and then ultimately 10,000 words. You want to be a novelist, you write 10,000 words. You go into your office, you write 10,000 words a day. And he emphasizes they don't have to be good words. You're just trying to get into the habit of writing and then going through the process. The getting things and ideas down on the page is important. And that book is absolutely fantastic. If you're interested at all in that kind of creative process.
I definitely think there's some truth to that, at least in my experience as a YouTube creator as well, because I was, because my channel had its 5th birthday yesterday, but my oldest video on my channel is almost a year after the channel was created. Because there's a lot of early stuff which got basically deleted because there was a lot of false starts along the way.
Oh, sure.
In terms of creating the channel and stuff. Not to say that the stuff that's the earliest on my channel that still exists is any good. It just was sufficiently not horrible enough to remain past the threshold of whatever the learning experience was in the first couple months of the channel. So I think there is a lot of merit to, as Think Media would say, you just got to hit record, where you just got to write, where you just got to act.
Well, there's so many barriers in your brain. Right?
Yeah.
There's so many barriers in your brain. If I spend this time, it's going to be crap. Or if you're starting a YouTube channel or whatever, it's like, I have no idea what I'm doing.
I have no idea what I'm doing. I have no idea what I'm doing this entire time.
Yeah.
I just had a subject I talked about, which fortunately is endless. So I got that going for me. That's all I had working for me.
As an adult, right? In my 40s now, I think that's the big trick of life, is like all the people that you've ever looked up to and talked to and think, oh, they've figured it out. They got it going on. They know exactly what they're doing. Like, nobody has any idea what they're doing. Not in the practice of law, not in YouTube creation. You go out and you do. You go and you figure it out. But every single day you're learning something new, which I think you can make into a very enjoyable process. But it's also scary because you don't know what you're doing. But that's everywhere. That's every walk of life. See, I've been doing some of my mentor stuff here because I used to be a mentor at a big law firm when I was at a big law firm. And so I would talk to the associates and I'd be like, so don't get in your head. All of this is scary. Your partners are just going to ask you to find red flags in a contract that you've never seen before. And it's very difficult to identify what's unusual. And we're all going to work through this together. And like, they don't know half of like what they have to project as. Like, part of life is also projecting authority and strength. And that's always been funny to me, because so many people, that's what it is. It's projections. And it's important.
Fake it till you make it does have some merit. So there's
it does have some merit. It does have some merit. Like, it goes too far with like pure fakery and that kind of thing. But yeah, absolutely. Like, believe that you can is legitimate. And then you can get out there and you can create. And it doesn't surprise me that like that's Stephen King's advice. That's advice I would give to, and I get this question a lot more now that I'm seen as a successful YouTuber. How do you get started? What do you do? And to some extent, it's
you just start.
Just start making things and don't be afraid to tweak, right? Like, if you go back and look at Virtual Legality 1, you'll see a different approach to a bunch of things. Now, I've been lucky in basically having a path to like, this is what I want to do, and kind of just polishing it. But yeah, there's a lot of differences. It's just like reading old essays or watching old videos. I watched episode 1, or I watched some of the stuff I did with like the easy allies of my answers and things like that. And it's like, I think I've gotten better.
Yeah, that's the other thing too, is I do like that piece of advice. Don't compare yourself to who someone else is today. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday. And as long as you're a little bit better than you were yesterday, you're doing just fine.
It's all we can do.
That's all you can really do. It's just try to make yourself incrementally better. And I'd like to think on my channel that I continue to make myself a little bit better than I was before. And those improvements may be small, but then of course in the aggregate, they add up to a lot. So
absolutely. Absolutely.
So here's your inspirational message for the day.
I was going to say, this has been the Hangouts and Headlines Inspiration Corner. Create, because if you don't create, you can't be
someone else will. It won't be as good because they're not you.
Brett, speaking of who knows what, that is important in Dungeons and Dragons also. Just because everyone can hear the DM does not mean their characters are around. I hated that when I ran my D&D game and punished it harshly until players learned. Like, if the party splits and one's in a cave and one's in town and they get no knowledge from the barman, and the other people in the cave treated as if their characters have that knowledge. Yeah. You got to punish those folks, DM. And that's how you get good at writing as well, right? A lot of D&D campaigns or other campaigns in other tabletop series have become novels, have had that success. So you gotta cut that off at the start, and then you can.
And even a major motion picture.
Yeah. Well, I was asked about
Jeremy
this.
Irons,
Well, we have a new one. Did you see this trailer yesterday?
Oh my God, is there really?
Matty Graham, Hoeg, did you catch the D&D movie trailer with Chris Pratt? And it's not Chris Pratt. I know we've got a lot of Chris's in Hollywood. It's Chris Pine, Captain Kirk. I have to say this, Kurt. So it's done as it's called Honor Among Thieves. It's done as a band of rogues. I think they have Led Zeppelin in the trailer. All of these things, which would suggest it is awful. I think based on the tack that they are taking, which is this kind of like literally Dungeons and Dragons, a little bit LARPy, a little bit wild and weird and comedy. I think the trailer is about as good as you could hope for.
Excellent.
Like, I put it on my list as has potential.
I'll go watch it with you in theater. I will come to you, and we'll go watch it together. Yeah, it'll be great.
So I think
road trip.
I thought it would be awful. The trailer was better than I thought. Expectations always matter. We'll see how it does. But yeah, it's Chris Pine, not Chris Pratt, not Chris Evans, not Chris Tucker. Not any of the other Chris's that we might otherwise have. Chris Rock, not any of those. It's Captain Kirk, and honestly, he sounds like Captain Kirk, like that kind of breathless J.J. Abrams Captain Kirk. He appears to be playing again in Dungeons and Dragons. But check out the trailer. It released at I think it's San Diego Comic-Con right now. I think that's what I'm seeing in the hashtags. So
I will check that out. I'll do a review on my channel. That'll be fun.
Of the trailer or the movie?
Either way.
Crazy Cat Queen, big King fan. Stephen King. I thought you were just a big fan of like Candy Crush. I think Stephen King needs to write. Any possibility that someone else writing the finale book, how does that happen from a copyright standpoint? Difference between if Martin is alive or not. A sequel is a derivative work. It'll be based on the characters that he has, that kind of thing. So Martin's in control of that, or the publisher is, but I think it's Martin. Whoever has
Tolkien's son finished, what was it, Silmarillion?
I don't know whether the Silmarillion was done or not, or whether it got tweaked. I know Tolkien's son, Christopher, worked on a bunch of the appendices and like other things, but I can't remember whether the Silmarillion was actually finished when J.R.R. Tolkien dies or not. I think it was mostly done. But then, yeah, Christopher Tolkien essentially dedicates his life to tweaking and writing and doing things in Middle Earth. That was his dad's legacy, which is an interesting legacy of your own to have as the son. But I think we're better off. I think he published the letters, for instance, that he got, that he found and was otherwise transmitted from like the front of World War and like those kinds of things, which is super interesting. And you get this kind of commentary track to the Lord of the Rings through those letters that you don't get in other places, because it's literally the author talking about like his thoughts and like what it is and isn't. That's how you get to know that even though people want to say, the ring is a nuclear bomb or this allegory for this, is that he didn't really want Lord of the Rings to be allegorical, which is exactly the opposite of what like Narnia is, which is strictly allegorical. I mean, it's basically a Christ allegory on its face. And so like you get those kinds of conversations because he and Lewis were friends, and it's a lot of fun stuff. If you're interested in that and you're just interested in learning, English literature, really, really interesting stuff.
But to better answer the question, better answer the legal question, because I moved past it a little bit. A copyright that you own is just a personal asset like any other personal asset. So when you die, we have two categories of things. We have the real property that you own, which is your land and your house, and then everything else, which includes copyright, your money, your cars, whatever, right? All that stuff. So then we just look to your will, and it says how to devise those things up. And in the event that you don't have a will, then there are default rules for that in your state, and that would usually then pass to your wife, then your child, and then your closest living relative, using the table of consanguinity, which is fantastically fun. So that's how that works. But if you have any real copyright assets or something, you probably want to specify in your will who gets control of that, because otherwise it'll just be whoever gets it, and then they have control of your copyright and they can kind of do whatever they want. So there's the better legal answer.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, Kurt. Yeah, and a lot of people will put together trusts and things, so it'll be the Tolkien Trust, the Martin Trust, that'll have control over these things. That's how you get Amazon buying the rights to like this very small portion of Middle Earth lore, is because they were able to control that and sell it off in pieces to New Line Cinema and Amazon and things like that. So yeah, don't get me wrong. A Song of Ice and Fire will be finished because there's money to be made there. I don't think that George R. R. Martin is going to be the one to finish it. And in fact, this is one of my favorite kind of recommendations here from Chubtoad. Maybe Brandon Sanderson, who is fantastic, could finish Game of Thrones books for Martin like he did for Jordan's Wheel of Time series. Brandon Sanderson is one of my favorites.
Wheel of Time did nothing for me.
Wheel of Time is generic discount Lord of the Rings. I'm sorry, Wheel of Time fans. I apologize. But no, Wheel of Time I think is fine. But much like its actual series name, it spins its wheels a bit.
So does Lord of the Rings.
Are you telling me that some of that poetry was unnecessary?
I'm saying we don't need 8 pages describing a leaf falling from a tree. Yeah.
He really likes his nature language. He really does. Yeah. No, you're right. You're right. Lord of the Rings is a bit overwrought, which is one of the reasons I really love Peter Jackson's movie series, is because I think he cut to the core. And yes, he made changes. But I think that the core of the notions of, in particular, kind of grace and humility in the Lord of the Rings is seen in those Peter Jackson films, and maybe wouldn't have been seen if you have to get through.
I love what Peter Jackson did. I thought that was great. Now, if we want to talk about the disaster that's a Hobbit, see, this is what happens when you take source material and you try to make a trilogy of it. When they originally announced it as a 2-parter, I was scared. And then they're like, let's make 3.
The Hobbit's so short. If you've never seen these books, The Hobbit is like this big, and like one book of the Lord of the Rings is like that.
Yeah.
So there's much less content and material. I like the Hobbit movies as kind of a guilty pleasure. And
I've never seen them.
You haven't seen them.
No,
I like hanging out in Middle Earth. Like they do capture, again, like New Zealand is Middle Earth. They've got some cool musical motifs. just hanging out there is fun, I think. But there's no question that it's not The Hobbit as a book, because The Hobbit is a children's book. Lord of the Rings is a cool sequel because it's not. And then what they did was The Lord of the Rings was such a success that the Hobbit films are effectively what you would think of as a prequel for The Lord of the Rings. They're that serious. They are that dour. They take this kind of...
Didn't Lord of the Rings come before?
They did,
Hobbit?
right? So Lord of the Rings...
So you said sequel, and I was like, wait a second. No.
Yeah, so they build it like it's a Lord of the Rings, like it has that flavor. And then you attach it to the Hobbit story, which is essentially a fairy tale, and it gets a little weird. Because it's not the
but
Hobbit.
Also in the books, didn't Lord of the Rings come before the Hobbit?
No, Hobbit's first.
Did they write Hobbit first?
Hobbit is written first.
Okay, all right. So okay, my bad.
Yeah, that's one of the really cool sequel hooks, I think, is he takes this thing that is the ring that makes you invisible. He wins from Gollum with riddles, and then he makes that the hook for his entire like narrative world building. And I think that's one of the cooler ways to do a sequel like that has been shown. But I'm a big fan. So take, as we say when we're talking about more serious stuff, take that with a grain of salt. My tilt is very pro J.R.R. Tolkien. What else we have here? Britt Cormier, that lesson applies to almost any activity. Just do it. Want to be in better shape? Get out and exercise. You don't have to run 3 miles. Just walk for a bit. Do a few push-ups, but do it every day. Grow. Keep doing it. Absolutely. Yeah, if we do one thing here in Hangouts and Headlines on this Casual Friday, it's you can't get the thing done if you don't do the thing. And don't let the mental blocks that you're going to do it poorly, that your big computer.
You are going to do it poorly. You are absolutely going to do it poorly. Do it poorly, and then you'll do it a little bit better the next time.
Yeah, do it, and you'll do it better, and you'll get more used to it, and you'll have fun with it. And at the end of the day, if you're talking about writing, when I write articles or even long blog posts or whatever like that, you get it down on the page. And then the editing process is easier for you. It's more fun. You've got the structure, you know what you want to do, and you've got words down rather than that blank page staring at you. So absolutely, thanks, Britt. Really appreciate it. More D&D, please. Please stand by. Yeah, we know. Lawyers and Dragons, much more popular than I thought it would be as a debut episode. Kind of randomness on my channel. So we've got already, I think, 21,000 views on that. We're going to get the gang back together. I think Kurt's going to probably make an appearance if he can find the time. We're going to have some guests. We're going to do some things, and it's going to be...
I will make the time for this. Let me tell you, it would take a lot for me not to do this, because it's just way too much fun.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, the trick is always just scheduling and moving things around, and we don't even have a schedule for what we are currently contemplating, which is not a one-off. I will tell you that.
Excellent.
Right now. So everybody's very excited, but I, in fact, after this episode of Hangouts and Headlines, have a planning call with David to go over things. So things have gotten real here in Lawyers and Dragons Land because of you all being nice enough to watch it. And
I'll play any race,
I'll
play any part. I don't care. It's fine.
All right.
That's a bid. What do you guys need?
Here's my co-counsel talking enthusiastically about a famous property that was built off a tabletop RPG campaign. Yes, The Expanse was written coming from that world, and we love The Expanse here in Hoeg House. Newt says, I finally started watching The Expanse. You're in for a treat. One of my favorite science fiction shows, maybe ever.
When did that come out?
The Expanse? So The Expanse comes out when I'm still at the big firm. I think over the last 10 years or so, it's had 6 seasons.
Okay.
So it was originally a Sci-Fi Channel show, and they poured all their resources into it. They canceled it after season 3, but it was very, very critically popular. Season 3 is one of the best seasons of television I've ever seen. Amazon picks it up and does seasons 4, 5, and 6 with an even bigger budget. Doc McFuzzball, in fairness, King writes in an existing world, and each book can be its own story. Ice and Fire is a series in an original fantasy world, much harder. Yeah, I think doing all that world building is much harder. I don't know how much world building like Martin has left to do. You would hope that like the baselines for what the world is are done by the end of book 5.
There's a lot of world already. Yeah. I'm
reluctant to ever say any kind of type of writing is harder. Certainly, I think, writing an airport pot boiler might be easier when you just, you do the suspense scenes and things like that. And I do think building up an entire world, J.R.R. Tolkien figuring out what the mythology of Middle Earth is, George R.R. Martin figuring out what the history of these various countries are and how these houses work. I think that's all very hard and probably harder than describing a small town in Maine as kind of like a functional level. But in terms of writing books, King gets books written. And so I have to at least take it on that scale. George R.R. Martin hasn't written a Song of Ice and Fire book in a long, long time, with the exception of what we're going to be talking about in this article whenever we actually click over to it. Let's see here. What else do we have here? Not trying to skip too much. We seem to be having a lot of cool comments, including Britt slamming The Hobbit. Hobbit is barely a movie. This is too far, Britt. So The Hobbit is not as good as Lord of the Rings. But if you really think about it and you compare it to things like Amazon's Wheel of Time or all the CW fantasy shows or most of the stuff that comes out in movies, The Hobbit movie has a lot of really cool lyrical scenes, has basically everything through their departure at Bag End is straight out of the book, feels very cool, and then has very good music and cinema and things like that. So I think you're being too harsh on The Hobbit. Yeah, it definitely doesn't have the weight of The Lord of the Rings. It never could have. But maybe we should all, have a watch together. We'll watch The Hobbit again, and I will talk about, some of the good stuff that you can take from it. A lot of the dwarves are very interestingly cast. A lot of good stuff there. I don't know, Britt. I don't know. See, this is becoming a theme here in the chat, and it's just making me sad on a Friday. The Hobbit movies are okay, folks.
They stretched it too thin, man. I mean, I've never seen it, and I know they stretched it too thin.
They did stretch it too thin, definitely. Well, the last movie is the Battle of the Five Armies, and it's like this isn't even a scene in the book, give or take, and it's a movie. It's like 3 hours long. They could have done 6 LOTR movies and 1 Hobbit movie. Yeah, they absolutely could have. I think we got the right pacing on Lord of the Rings, especially with the director's cut. It's about 12 and a half hours long.
Yeah.
I think they nailed it. What else we got here? They shoved way too much stuff that was not in the book into the movie. I think we're talking about The Hobbit there. Yeah, they pulled a bunch of stuff from the appendices to talk about Sauron early, effectively. If you can get the copyrights for the characters, you could write it, right? There's new books with Ms. Marple, even though Agatha Christie is no longer alive. I suspect those might be public domain. When is the copyright date of Ms. Marple?
Yeah.
I have no idea. So
copyright doesn't last forever, and older copyrights expired sooner.
You're going to start seeing Sherlock Holmes in a couple of things now, too.
Sherlock Holmes' copyright did expire in the U.S., but not the UK. But it doesn't matter, at least as far as U.S. law is concerned.
Yeah, and then you get into things like the given version of Sherlock Holmes can be separately copyrighted, so you can't have your Sherlock Holmes be the guy from Elementary or Benedict Cumberbatch's Sherlock Holmes. Like, they can't have like the exact same qualities if they were added to the old qualities. That's a whole different episode.
Trying to separate those out in a legal sense becomes very, very tricky at best.
Yeah,
I'm not sure. I mean, in theory, you're right. I'm just not sure in practice how the degree to which you can sever the adaptations and say these are like separate characters as opposed to manifestations of the same character. It's I wouldn't want to have to try to enforce that in a court of law if I were those people. That'd be tough.
No, we covered it in Virtual Legality because Netflix got sued for the one that stars Millie Bobby Brown, and whether or not Sherlock Holmes had a sister when it comes out of copyright, and whether or not that is specific to like who Sherlock Holmes is, or whether that was added in one of the later books, and then that's completely separate and it doesn't get tied up to the earlier. I mean, like all sorts of fun stuff there. But yeah. ADC 2003-2996. Sorry, more depth v. Heard. Can the appellant court say judge was too firm on hearsay, but the excluded documents wouldn't help Heard, so no retrial?
Oh yeah, that's usually the second part of your question is the most pertinent. You have to show that it makes a material difference in the outcome, and by material difference, we mean that the jury would have reached a different verdict. So, whatever error you show, first of all, you have to show the error, which is a whole host of problems unto itself. Then you have to show that, but for that error, the jury would have done something different, which is basically borderline impossible. So you can, in appeal, you can successfully attack multiple different things a judge did, and then you come to the end and be like, but it doesn't matter because these are not material in the sense it would have impacted the verdict. So I personally think that the judge, in my personal opinion, I think she's too harsh on the hearsay rule, And I think she's also too harsh on foundation rule. This is a personal opinion. That being said, if I'm the Court of Appeals, one, I can't overrule her because her decisions, while I think are too strict, I can't, strictly speaking, say they were wrong. And even if I could, I couldn't get to the next part of it making any difference in the end. So if you're trying to attack a verdict for those kinds of reasons, you're going to have a really bad time in trying to attack it for basically literally judgment calls of evidence or like questions that were asked of where things were overruled or admitted. Like either way, judges get a lot of latitude, and appeals are for losers, as Andrew Branca likes to say.
Well, they are by nature. It's that's definitional, right? Co-counsel just handed me a Post-it note that says that Hempland, Texas, or TX, I'm making assumptions, gifted 10 memberships to the channel to various folks here. That is fantastic, Hempland, Texas. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I wish it would flag it for me a little bit better here. I can't see that necessarily, but I will find it. And thank you, co-counsel, as always, for telling me about these really cool things happening in the chat.
So the only chance I see for Amber Heard on her appeal is this legal issue, which is a pure legal issue about whether or not you can defame a public person by implication. And that's just a pure legal question. Can you or can't you? Virginia has answered the question in general about implication, saying defamation by implication is permitted, which is the entire basis of this lawsuit. But some states have distinguished about public people versus non-public people on defamation by implication. Apparently, some states have said, while it's possible to have defamation by implication against non-public figures, it is not possible to have defamation of public figures by non-public persons. This appears to be purely an issue of state law. There's no federal law on point either way. So it's just completely up to the states individually. So all these other states which have answered this question are what we call persuasive authority, which means Virginia can do whatever the hell it wants. So it's up to Virginia to decide this question, which apparently they've never decided this precise question. And I did like that from Elaine in her motion. In her motion for a new trial. It's to the wrong person in some sense, because the trial judge has to apply the laws that currently exist. And the laws that currently exist says defamation by implication. So the trial judge really has no choice but to do what they're doing. But it is a let's say lucid argument that makes sense on appeal. And that's just a question of, well, does Virginia want to go that way or not? I would suggest the overall thrust of the case law suggests that Elaine's more likely to lose than not, but it is a pure question of law. And if you ever get to the Virginia Supreme Court, they can just change the law. So we'll find out, I guess. So there's Elaine's best hope. Everything else is just garbage. Oh, the jury didn't have enough evidence to rule for Depp. They didn't have enough to rule for the amount of damages. The juror 15 issue. Like everything else is just garbage. There's a pure legal issue that one day, maybe, if they have a wish and a dream, the Virginia Supreme Court will grant their hopes. We'll see.
Well, and if they did, that would be a full granting of their hopes. If you literally can't do an implementation,
it would absolutely. It would. Well, first of all, it would kill both of their lawsuits. It would just, because they're both public figures. Yeah. So it would kill both their claims instantly. So it's like, it's just not possible. End of analysis. Okay, well, that was easy.
Well, so, Waldman's is an agency question, but I don't think it's implication, because doesn't he say like?
Well, no, that's a different basis. That's a different basis for Depp, right? So absolutely. So if we're looking for Depp's reasons to appeal, so Heard's reasons to appeal are, okay, defamation by implication is just not possible in a public figure setting, full stop. If she's right, then both of their lawsuits go poof. Depp's best arguments deal with Waldman. Walderman. Is it Walderman or Waldman? I can never remember. Waldman, thank you.
Yeah, two syllables.
His best arguments are for Waldman. And there's a couple ones along those lines. First, that he cannot be an agent because in order to be an agent, you have to be an employee. And he's not an employee because he's an independent contractor, because he's an attorney. And there seems to be a case law that strongly supports that proposition in Virginia. So if he can't be an agent, then he can't be acting on Depp's behalf in this sense, and so Depp can't be liable, because the only reason Depp is liable is because he's acting as an agent, and if he can't act as an agent, then you're done. So there's that idea. There's also the idea that, to my mind, the established truth maybe of what actually happened versus what Waldman said, there's not enough daylight between it. So one of the things that you can do in defamation is you can say, yes, this is false, but the falsity doesn't matter because the nature of the discrepancy is so small that it wouldn't lead to a different impression in a person's mind. So one of the things I say is like, okay, so maybe Waldman made false statements of fact, but the false statements of fact are, to my mind, arguably so subtle in terms of what actually appears to have been established that for legal purposes, it doesn't matter. There's not enough daylight there. So that's an argument that seems viable. And then there's also the idea that even if he is acting as an agent, so assuming he can act as an agent, which seems to go against the case law, there's the idea of the scope of the agency just being completely unestablished in law, in fact, because of course he says attorney-client privilege, which is entirely the right answer. And so now you can't get to the scope of the agency. The jury can infer, but they can't speculate. And so there is, where that line starts and where it stops can get tricky. But I think there's a very credible argument that there's not enough information for them to infer a scope of the agency and speculation and therefore legally impermissible. So there's at least 3, and I think on a better day, I've identified 5 legal issues that are much more promising for Johnny Depp on his appeal. So we'll see if he picks any of those options on his appellate argument when that comes.
And I said no Amber Heard, Johnny Depp today. Look at that. Thank you, ADC, and thank you, Kurt, for that. Yeah, we'll see how the appeals go. It'll be a little while yet, though, folks. Don't expect it to go away. It's gonna be a little while. We're gonna have those conversations. We already talked about earlier this week that Bot Sentinel has promised that they're going to cover YouTubers who monetize hate with respect to Depp and Heard. We expect to see some of our colleagues on that list, so we'll cover that here. There will be more Amber Heard and Johnny Depp stuff that we'll be talking about in the future. I promise. But right now, we're trying to stay at once per week. We'll see if we can do it. Steve Arnold, we need a Mistborn or Stormlight archive series. Brandon Sanderson is the god of modern fantasy. It's funny. I think I'm a little bit skittish about genre adaptations at this point in time, but I would love to see Mistborn as it exists in my head on the screen. I just don't know whether, Amazon's going to do that. I don't know who's going to do that. Peter Jackson, Lord of the Rings, was kind of just a random success because Hollywood does not have a great deal of positive history with adapting fantasy. And they're trying to get better. I think a lot of the shots in the trailers for Amazon's Lord of the Rings series are good looking. They're trying to ape the Peter Jackson style, which is a choice. That's interesting because they are so beloved. But I don't know. I don't know what that story is going to be in that series. I will try to approach it with an open mind. But I tried to approach Obi-Wan with an open mind.
Story is more important than visuals.
Absolutely it
is. The biggest problem of Hollywood is using visual effects as a substitute or patch for story, which doesn't work because people are much more likely to react to a movie made by people on their phone that has better story than all the CGI and all the cinematography in the world. Making it look pretty doesn't really help if you don't have good story.
And when it comes out on home video, I might do a postmortem on why Maverick works as well as it does, because that's the highest rated movie I've given a rating to in the last couple of years. So I might talk about why
this is not well crap.
Well, it's not. It's engaged with character in a way that I think that other movies are not, and that they used to be. Maverick's old school. It's a callback, but it's also presented in a new format. And I think what it does with respect to its plotting and its characters is what movies and these kinds of things should be. Is it popcorn fluff? Yes, to a certain extent, but it's very high level. So I think that's what it does. But I might do a postmortem on that. I
have questions about plot holes though, but that's fine. But it's a good enough story. No one cares, right?
Lucky became a YouTube member. Thank you so much, Lucky. Let's talk about how to market your new TV show, right? So here's the background here, folks. First of all, this is Doctor Who sitting on a throne of knives. So little Ryan Johnson, little Doctor Who. No, of course. This is a ancient Targaryen, blood of the dragon, sitting on the infamous Iron Throne with all the swords of his conquered enemies, etc. Anyway, so if you followed this at all, Game of Thrones started not too terribly popular on HBO, but became very, very popular. Became one of their most successful shows of all time. And then, as we talked about, kind of dived a little bit, and people lost interest, and people really hated the last season, which is important when you're a serial storyteller, because that is what your whole book is based on, right? Lost, if you remember, was very, very popular until it wasn't, and they didn't make the sales that they thought they would make. Game of Thrones definitely didn't have this zeitgeist presence that they thought they would have coming out of finishing the series, right? When you finish at least the first 3 Star Wars movies in 1983, you get that momentum. You are able to sell Star Wars novels and Star Wars toys for decades before even adding to that series, because of what that story was that you told. And Game of Thrones disappeared like that. Honestly, it has absolutely no trending, nothing going for it, until we start talking about this new HBO show that, ironically, given what we've talked about, is going to come out basically against Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power on Amazon. So we're going to get super high budgeted fantasy going head to head, and it'll be interesting to see. But when you do have a super high budget kind of thing, and you're trying to figure out what to do with your show and your goodwill that effectively evaporated when you weren't expecting it to evaporate, you have to figure out a plan. And their plan right now, with the show in the can, this one coming out, so you go to the Hollywood Reporter, give them access, and talk about what they have built. So we're going to look at this. We're going to use some of our critical thinking skills that we use on much, much more serious stuff.
Also, I'd like to critique the composition of this photo. It is overexposed, and it's not very well taken.
It is grainy. It might be a screenshot. It looks to me like it might have film grain on it.
Then I will criticize the cinematographer who filmed it as part of the show then.
Well, honestly, so this is Sapochnik. This is how he looks. He takes things in dim lighting and whatnot. So it might be very dim. War is certain, or so Daemon Targaryen hopes. The cunningly arrogant prince leads a strategy meeting inside the torchlit gloom of Dragonstone Castle. This is not to be taken. This isn't actually happening, folks. This is just a summary of inside an episode. I want patrols along the island's perimeter, declares the glowering demon, clad in all black with long silver blonde hair. Conscript the dragon riders. They're capable fighters. We have Cyrax, Caraxes, and Tyraxes. And then he can't remember the other dragon, and he gets a little bit animated about it, folks. You can see that on your screen. And this is the start. So I wanted to talk about this. I want to pull this out. So this is a kind of normal way to do a fluff piece on a piece of fiction, is to say, take out a kind of behind the scenes image, just like if you're imagining you're watching one of these featurettes on, I don't know, Disney Plus or HBO Max, as the case may be. But what's interesting about this is that this first kind of thing, it's designed to humanize. It's designed to make it, these are people putting together a product for you. They're craftsmen and women that are putting together this thing that's important to them. It's the very first anecdote that they use is essentially them getting very upset at the number of dragon names they have to memorize. Actor Emma Darcy, who portrays the free-spirited Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen, sympathizes. All the dragons have weird names with X's in them. I literally got to the point where I thought I was naming Santa's reindeer, Smith admits. Now, that's designed to be humanizing, right? Of course it is. But it's also interesting because one of the things the Hollywood Reporter knows, and HBO gets to approve this almost certainly, but not every little bit of how it's organized, is that people really didn't like the ending of Game of Thrones. That's something HBO is going to deny about this, but this is designed to admit that there's a lot of weird things.
Why not just admit? I mean, if you're HBO, why not just admit it? Be like, yes, it didn't work, and we have taken note of that, and we're going to not screw up, so our show will be fantastic as a result.
We're going to get to their position. We are,
okay,
and it's interesting. It's interesting. I think Annette Matz here has a good comment. The plan is to tell everybody that Dan and Dave are gone, which does appear in this article, and replaced with the director of the fan favorite episodes of Hardhome and Battle of Bastards. Yes, in Miguel Sapochnik. And yeah, I think that is the plan. We're going to talk about that. You're spoiler alert. But yes,
is the writing team from Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul available? Maybe they can fix this nightmare.
No, they're busy. They're busy making their show. But yeah, Vince Gilligan, always follow him. He'll be awesome for you. House of the Dragons character names and its dragons most definitely count as characters have been a source of discussion. HBO's highly anticipated Game of Thrones prequel, which you see I highlighted differently because it's like you're always going to say it's highly anticipated. I have no idea what the Q score data guy equivalent for this particular upcoming HBO show is, but it's fun, right? It's a fluff piece. Series is based on George R.R. Martin's 700-page book Fire and Blood. Now, if you know Fire and Blood, that's interesting in and of itself. Fire and Blood is not a novel. Fire and Blood is essentially built like a history book. It is designed to be a supplement to the concept of A Song of Ice and Fire. So you already know just here that HBO took what amounts to the appendices and is making a story out of them. Interesting. So early in the writing process, Dragon showrunner Miguel Sapochnik pointed out to his fellow showrunner Ryan Condal they were going to have, for instance, a Princess Rhaenyra and a Princess Rhaenys unless they started making tweaks to Martin's mythology. You know, we have to change some names, Sapochnik told Condal, and Condal replied, "We can't," which firmly established that the production would take a staunchly loyalist approach to adapting Martin's complex world. So we got now 3 paragraphs here. We start out with the Dragon Anecdote, which is a little bit condescending towards what this thing is, which I think is good. It's designed to take some of the fire out, ironically enough. And then what's the real purpose here? It's designed to, at first, billboard, highlights, lampshades, however else you want to describe it, tell folks that they aren't going to mess with Martin's mythology. That, oh, we should change some of these names, which they famously did in HBO's Game of Thrones with a number of important characters.
Changing the names was not the principal problem.
It wasn't, but this is designed to give you the warm, fuzzy feelings. Oh, as the commenter said, we're not in D&D's hands anymore. Well, we're going to be staunchly loyalist to what George R.R. Martin has put before us. Okay. I've been a fan of these books for 20 years, Condal explains, which is interesting. Because the Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire is that old. But the actual thing that they're adapting is 3 years old, 4 years old. So they're playing a little bit fast and loose with that. You can't follow Thrones. It's the Beatles. Say nice things about it. The Targaryens are like the Jedi in Star Wars, where you heard about this time when they were plentiful and powerful, and you always wanted to see that. Now,
not fair. That's not fair. Wings made some good tunes. And, Paul McCartney did some good solo stuff. You can follow the Beatles.
Yes. Yeah. Paul McCartney. I saw his Super Bowl show. He also contributed music to the original Destiny. You can check that out on YouTube. But this is also interesting because they're going to mention Star Wars a bunch here, which is an interesting choice, primarily because Star Wars is in, let's call it flux. We're not going to go too far with Star Wars. Casey D says she likes the Star Wars analogy, and I can see that. When you start out, it's like you want to say they're the Jedi. Well, they're not like magical warriors or anything like that. But it's talking about a prequel situation in which you have the Targaryens, which are at that point where we watch the main story, essentially exiled, and we're watching the last of the Targaryens, and this is where they're in power. And so I think it is an acceptable analogy, but it's an interesting one. So keep Star Wars in mind. But making the first follow-up to what was arguably the biggest hit of the 21st century, maybe we're limiting ourselves to TV shows, because if we aren't, I think the MCU is the clear biggest hit of the 21st century. It has gobbled up everything in theaters and elsewhere.
Yeah.
But
way past the point of excess, in my view. But that's me.
Yeah, I don't think the
everyone keeps going to see these things.
I don't think the MCU is hitting as hard as it once did. But yeah, certainly I think for the first 20 movies or so, it was the biggest hit of the 21st century. It was an epic struggle, nearly as high stakes and dramatic as the show itself. Fluff pieces, folks. And it all started the moment Game of Thrones began to end. July 2016, HBO had just announced Game of Thrones would conclude with an 8th and final season, agreeing to showrunners David Benioff and Diane Weiss's creative plan.
That was a mistake.
Here, HBO admits to agreeing to that creative plan. So. The network's strategy discussion, led by the company's chief content officer, Casey Blois. And if I get that pronunciation wrong, I apologize. I'm not like, Mark at Attractive News, just running around Hollywood taking lunches at the Brown Derby or whatever. So I don't know exactly how to pronounce this name properly, but this is an important figure because he's still in charge. And so you're going to see this referenced a bunch. The goal was obvious. The mood, anxious. HBO could attempt to build a Thrones franchise like Disney had done with Marvel and Star Wars. So interestingly, for this dateline, had Disney established a Star Wars franchise as of 2016? I don't know. Have they yet? I don't know. But again, they want to think of Game of Thrones as Marvel and Star Wars. If you're in the video game space, you've seen that Warner Brothers Interactive has a game called, I believe it's Metaverses, that features different characters from the WB stable. And so they got Bugs Bunny and they've got Shaggy from Scooby-Doo. They also have like Arya Stark from Game of Thrones. They're trying to establish this as a big franchise. Game of Thrones in of itself has an interesting issue there because it's not 4-quadrant, right? It doesn't appeal. Well, it might appeal to them. It shouldn't be watched by kids. And it's really kind of taking an adult approach to all of this stuff. So it's not as accessible as some of the other things you see done in the Fortnites of the world or what Warner Brothers wants to do with this metaverses concept. But you see it all here. They want it to be as big as Star Wars and as big as the MCU. To follow Thrones with failure would be highly embarrassing and expensive. Indeed, it did. Yet the rewards, sounding like Gollum, the rewards were staggering. A content stream of titles that could span decades and generate billions. It's like that hypothetical investing question. Would you rather have a guaranteed million or flip a coin for $1 billion? Is that a hypothetical investing question? A 50-50 shot at $1 billion?
Yeah.
Where's
this coin I could flip?
We could talk about expected value money, but the coin flip for $1 billion has an expected value of 500 million. So most people would take that.
I'll flip the coin for the $1 billion. Sounds pretty good.
Well, you have to give up $1 million to have the coin flip.
Do I have to have the $1 million?
You're going to do it on credit? Yeah. If you don't get the flip of the coins, though, you die. We have to make sure that this is stakes are high enough.
Okay.
They were understandably very nervous about failing and not living up to the original series, one insider recalls. So here we see not what we would expect. Right? I thought that there's a number of ways to defend this, just like we talk about in the trial setting. One of them is, things went wrong, as you suggested, Kurt, and we are reversing course. We're clearly going to hand wave at that. We're going to signal at the fact that things are different now, but we're going to stick to our guns that everything was fine. Everybody loved Game of Thrones to the very end. We talk about Game of Thrones and we think of it lovingly, in loving terms, that we didn't want to fail to live up to the original series when, as far as a lot of people are concerned, the original series crashed and burned. Right. This isn't unique to IMDb. This isn't Rotten Tomatoes. This is everywhere. I don't know anybody that likes season 8. Undoubtedly, there's someone out there. You can leave a comment or you can leave a chat if you really loved season 8.
They do exist. I've seen their pieces.
That they love season 8.
There are some.
We saw it as an opportunity to keep telling great stories or to restart telling great stories, but not necessarily to try and replace Game of Thrones as the most epic show in history. Producer, hey.
How are we defining epic?
Well, it's got a lot of big effects. To be fair, right? If you think about things like the Long Night episode and like the fights there, the story doesn't make sense. The characters don't work. The beats don't work, but it is a spectacle, right? I mean, like it's epic in the sense of like, I don't know, the old Cleopatra movie with Elizabeth Taylor. It's epic. It's just not very good. The Santa Fe-based Martin flew to Los Angeles to meet with HBO executives. He initially pitched 2 ideas. The first was a series based on his relatively lighthearted Duncan Egg novellas, which follow a knight who wanders Westeros with a young squire. They're actually pretty good. He's a good writer. The second was called The Dance of Dragons, which chronicled the storied civil war among Daenerys Targaryen's ancestors, an affair that tore Westeros apart 180 years before the events in Thrones. Dance had all the intrigue, competition for the Iron Throne, murders, duels, big battles, 20 dragons, all that stuff, Martin says. And it's a fun read. Again, it's presented as kind of a history in this book that we're going to be adapting.
How about this? How about we just announce for the first time ever, season 8 of Game of Thrones. This is the only one. This is the one. There never has been a season 8 before. This is the season 8. And we just pretend the whole thing didn't exist and retcon it.
Hey man, I still have the dream of Star Wars having a new episode that just starts out with Luke in a cold sweat waking up from the Disney trilogy. So, that's a terrible writing trope. It is horrible for narrative consistency, but it's great for fixing big problems. I know some of you folks like those movies. You can leave those comments and nasty grams for me. I could not dislike them more.
Wake up is all a dream.
Yeah, whatever. Disney wakes up and says, we could have marketed a Jedi Academy. We made some interesting choices there. HBO passed on Duncan Egg, probably not hardcore enough for them. Executives liked Dance, yet didn't want to let the fate and fortune of a potential franchise ride on a single idea. Why stop at one? I wanted to give ourselves every chance of success, Blois says. You don't want to say we're going to replace the biggest show of all time, and it's all going to rest on one script.
It's a good script. Why not?
I think a lot of people would try to go make the best script possible and then make the next.
If it's a good idea, I mean,
sequel.
Movies and TV shows have been built off less. I mean, Breaking Bad is based off a pretty simple idea, and it worked out pretty well.
Yes, although you
right?
can't copy, you can't clone Vince Gilligan in a jar.
Somewhat bitter chemistry teacher gets cancer, starts to make meth in order to support his family. It's pretty simple. And then it worked out pretty great. So simple works.
As long as you got one of the best writers and best writing rooms, you can do it. The network researched Martin's collective works and compiled about 15 possible prequel concepts. Didn't want to base this on one script, so we built 15. Since Thrones showrunners Benioff and Weiss had declined to be involved with any spinoffs, HBO met with a diverse array of writers. We tried everything, Bloy said. There were no ideas too weird. Well, maybe one. And this is a lot of why I like this article, is HBO was more freely sharing stuff that we had heard rumors of or whispers of and didn't really know, like what this whole group of prequel possibilities was. Well, maybe one, a series concept that sounds like a superhero team-up about the fabled 7 gods of Westeros as if they were actual people. The premise followed a father, smith, warrior, maiden, crone, etc., as they had adventures and came to be worshipped as gods. That didn't get very far, an insider says dryly. And I think this actually reflects well. I don't like this process. I don't like the kind of corporate factory making of prequels like this, or I don't like thinking about it that way. Obviously, the sausage has to get made. But I do like this as, that is weird. That'll probably never work, but at least you thought about it for a little bit. And that's why they put this anecdote here, is it does reflect well on them being open to ideas.
And
when they say that didn't get very far,
at least being able to recognize some stupid, which is promising.
Well, this couldn't have been, this would have been bad.
Yes, but that's my point. They were at least able to recognize some stupid. That's promising.
Yes. 5 concepts were eventually selected and put into development. All were prequels set before the events in Thrones. This unprecedented bake-off approach would become cheekily known online as the War of the 5 Pitches. The reason that's cheeky, folks, if you don't know Game of Thrones, is that one of the main storylines throughout the middle portion of the series is a war called the War of the 5 Kings that features all of the parties going at each other. And so 5 pitches, that just writes itself, basically. One effort was a script about the destruction of the ancient Targaryen Empire of Valyria by Max Borenstein of Kong Skull Island. Not a horrible movie. Another was a take on the Dornish warrior queen Nymeria by Oscar winner Brian Hedlund. LA Confidential. I would just like to see it done as a noir, honestly. And yet another, like much in this story, never before reported, was about Aegon's conquest. What? So, Hollywood Reporter, why do you have to point out that this is exclusive? I don't. It's fine. Was about Aegon's conquest of Westeros as penned by Rand Ravitch and Far Shariat of The Astronaut's Wife. One of the most boring movies ever made. That script portrayed the William the Conqueror-inspired figure as a drunken lout. So they're going out. They are spending money. These things don't write themselves, to try to just go find something that they can use. For Dance, HBO first approached writer Carly Ray, who had experience scripting dark fantasy dramas like Westworld and Watchmen. But Ray and Martin couldn't agree when the story should begin amid the long and tangled timeline of Targaryen history. Wars often begin in times of peace, reads Martin's book, and it was important to the author to show that transition. But such a move would mean a series that spanned generations, and how would that work exactly? Next came Brian Cogman, a co-executive producer on Thrones, who penned several acclaimed episodes on the original series and understood the franchise as well as anybody. Insiders say his take on Dance was good, yet HBO ultimately passed. At first, HBO was like, how can we subvert Thrones? So subversion, folks. Subversion is one of those watchwords that I really, really hate. You hear about the Disney Star Wars movies trying to subvert your expectations, especially from Mr. Rian Johnson. The interesting thing about Game of Thrones, or A Song of Ice and Fire more particularly, is that it exists as a subversion of expectations of high fantasy, of Lord of the Rings, right? So I don't know what you get when you subvert a subversion. Maybe you get Lord of the Rings back, but it's funny to me to think of Hollywood folks thinking like that is the key to what people want, when certainly right here in 2022, it is patently self-evident that what people want is essentially old-timey things that make sense rather than full-on subversions of material.
I think subversion can be okay, but subversion for the sake of subversion is a real problem. Like, we have to trick the audience and misdirect the audience because there'll be the surprise of it. And I don't think that's necessarily true.
But you look at the major successes in 2022, right? You look at Maverick, you look at Stranger Things 4, they play it straight. And some people complain about it being too predictable or whatever, and they are at like a fundamental level, but that's good storytelling at another fundamental level.
Yes, good storytelling should drive, all elements of the story should drive to the conclusion, and like basic storytelling 101. Yeah.
You know what's going to happen in Act 3 of Maverick, folks. Even if you've seen the trailers and that's it, that's fine though. And Stranger Things 4, which I love, is one of my other highest rated things of the year, plays it straight. You know what's going to happen going into that finale, give or take. You don't know the details, but you know a lot of what's going on, and they have a subversion in that as well. But in terms of the overall plot of the season, it plays it straight. And I've thought this a long time, right? Before I start my YouTube channel, I put out an article that at the time was the most viral thing that I've ever written, on the law firm blog post that was about The Last Jedi and Luke Skywalker, and needing to subvert things, not being able to believe in an age of heroes and all this kind of stuff. And that to me has borne out massively since the release of The Last Jedi. And I think you're seeing it right now as you don't need to subvert. And I think it's even more pointed out because the reason they're putting this question here in this article is what they are going to say is that we don't need to do that. The Dance of Dragons felt like an obvious straight down the line prequel. So I think they were less hot on it because it was like, well, who wants to see more Game of Thrones? And then the irony, of course, is lots of people. We don't need to subvert anything. We can tell a straight line prequel. Thrones, Song of Ice and Fire isn't about Age of Heroes stuff. It's basically its own subversion, but at least this isn't trying to get even twistier and trickier just off the top, right? Agrees Condal, the desire at HBO was to not just offer up a sequel that's about the war for the throne. They wanted to do something so totally different that it would blow everybody's minds. I think that's why they didn't pick up this show we're talking about and went with The Long Night instead. The show that never was. This is actually what attracted me to the article in the first instance was all this stuff about Blood Moon. So they spent like $40 million making this pilot, and it then just died. This was going to be the show that was the follow-up. In 2018, 1 year before Thrones was set to air its series finale, HBO announced a pilot order for a potential successor series, a show with the working title of Blood Moon, taking place years before the events in Thrones, during the fabled Age of Heroes and the wintry apocalypse known as the Long Night. Its showrunner, Jane Goldman, had considerable success making acclaimed R-rated genre hits with credits like Kick-Ass and Kingsman: The Golden Circle. According to Orsi, Blood Moon won the bake-off on merit. Blood Moon really stood out as different with unique world building. Tonally, it felt very adult, sophisticated, and intelligent, and there was a thematic conversation at the center of it about disenfranchisement in the face of colonialism and religious extremism. So we would have gotten some sounds like real life kind of politics in an HBO show about Westeros. And it could have worked for their brand, honestly. Like the HBO does this with their shows. And yet we'll note, this is headline, The Show That Never Was. This show dies. And what's interesting about this, it isn't a fluff piece, but nobody can say anything bad about this. A cast headed by Naomi Watts was assembled. Massive new sets were built. A Blood Moon pilot was shot for a whopping 30 to 35 million. Sorry, I hyperbolized. It's only $30 million. On a piece of content that won't be released.
$3 million for a pilot is a lot.
Yeah.
That's an insane amount of money.
I suspect what you've got in those pilot charges is that you're building things that will be used for series. So everything that would have been spread out for series gets locked into that pilot, especially when we're counting it as if the series doesn't happen. But yeah, it's a big bet, right? The result was locked away in a dungeon so deep that even Martin has never been allowed to see it. It required a lot more invention. It was higher risk, higher reward. There wasn't anything glaringly wrong with it. Development and pilots are hard, says man responsible for losing his employer $30 million. Agrees Robert Greenblatt, who was then chairman of HBO's parent company, Warner Media. It wasn't unwatchable or horrible or anything. It was very well produced and looked extraordinary, but it didn't take me to the same place as the original series. It didn't have that depth and richness that the original series pilot did, or that season 7 and 8 did. So again, they're signaling. These are whistles to you all, right? This was good. This was good. You would have liked it. It wasn't unwatchable. It wasn't horrible, but it wasn't good enough for us. So we're willing to burn $30 million in a hole because we only want to give you the best here at HBO Max. And that's why we're talking about this different show. For Goldman, yeah. I'm sorry, Kurt?
I was just saying K.
Well, we're talking about rhetoric, right? In headlines here, we talk about why these things exist in the place that they do. For Goldman, sources say HBO's verdict came as a total shock. She was appearing confident of a series order, had assembled a writer's room to break the first season. Sorry, writers that agreed to that. And was in the middle of making changes to the pilot based on network notes when she learned of Blood Moon's fate. Goldman has never spoken publicly about HBO's decision, but she quickly rebounded to write Disney's upcoming live action, The Little Mermaid. Probably with 50% less discussion of the effects of colonialism and religious extremism, but maybe it's a completely different Little Mermaid. We don't know. In a bit of PR savvy, HBO's admission that Blood Moon was not moving forward was coupled with a far more positive announcement, a series order for an entirely different Thrones prequel. Yeah, they canned this at the same time that they announced that we're doing Dance of Dragons. So yeah, nobody will see it. It's pretty interesting, and we do have people commenting on this kind of stuff, which is fun. Studarukin, Naomi Watson, an unaired pilot. Looking forward to the David Lynch movie that will come out of this. I think it might already exist, right? If you could just strap the concept of Blood Moon to Mulholland Drive, I think you've got a stew going there. And also, thank you so much for becoming a new member. I really appreciate it. Absolutely.
Everyone who becomes a member kicks ass. Join the channel today.
Thank you, Kurt. I appreciate it. And then we've got other comments here. I am collecting them. We'll go back to them as we go. I'm just seeing some that relate specifically to what we're talking about. And yeah. So Nabots, who I think the last time I saw her in anything really big was either The Ring or King Kong or something like that, was going to star in this and isn't. The rise of the super fan. So here we're going to establish that one of the showrunners isn't just a normal that has never read Song of Ice and Fire. He is deeply invested in A Song of Ice and Fire. In 2013, the screenwriter Ryan Condal was shooting an NBC pilot in Santa Fe. A self-described superfan of Martin's books, he reached out to the author and asked if he could buy him dinner. Martin agreed, and the two struck up a friendship. 5 years later, Martin
agreed to meet for dinner. What a surprise!
I was skipping that line of humor, Kurt.
Sorry.
He's a larger individual. He's going to accept a lot of dinner offers, I suspect. 5 years later, Martin sent Condal a life-changing message. He just said, hey, I'm in town for the Emmys. Let's grab a beer. I have a job for you if you want. And I lost my mind. The meeting was about the Dance of Dragons. Martin was still determined to get his Targaryen epic made. George was frustrated because this was the story he really wanted to tell. I wasn't ready to give up on it, Martin says. And I liked Ryan's writing, and he really knew my world well, which was a big thing. Martin famously gave the sign-off to D&D back in the day. I wonder how he actually feels about that. The next day, Condal received a call from his agents. They said, did you have a meeting with George R.R. Martin yesterday? Because HBO just called based on that and made an offer. Hollywood. The swiftness of HBO getting on board with Martin's desire to hire Condal was the beginning of a pivot in the author's relationship with the network. So here we have more messaging, right? What didn't you like about Game of Thrones as it ended? Chances are the overall thesis is that they ran out of book material, which means they ran out of George R.R. Martin stuff. Martin separated from the production, and it all went to hell in a handbasket. So this paragraph is designed to say, Martin's back, baby. Get excited. During the latter seasons of Thrones and the early years of HBO hunting
He's going to be in the writing room?
I think, let's read. I can't remember exactly what his relationship is, but it's closer. Martin sometimes felt out of the loop, but after the original show's season 8 backlash, when many fans protested that the storylines felt rushed to conclusion, Martin had long advocated making Thrones 10 seasons long. Slightly biased in that, it's given that he's getting checks, but that's fine. And around the time HBO produced and rejected Blood Moon, all agree that Martin's influence rose within the company. Put simply, HBO thought, hey, maybe we ought to listen more to that guy who created all of this. Which, if we're giving benefit of the doubt, which is probably undeserved right here in this portion of the article, is HBO admitting to error, saying they shouldn't have what sounds like squeezed out Martin a little bit, or at least not made him comfortable joining the writer's room or otherwise participating in the making of Game of Thrones. And so we first tried to greenlight the one that he didn't know about, that he's never seen. And then when that failed, for whatever reason, we came back and said, you want to make that one that you want to make. In 2021, the company signed Martin to a massive 5-year deal. So he's assigned with HBO now, worth in the mid 8 figures. Every subsequent project HBO has put into development based on his work has received his approval and the kind of close involvement he hasn't had since the early days of Game of Thrones. So if this turns out crap, you know exactly where to send the blame. Martin selecting Condal ended up further demonstrating the author's acumen. Condal's take on the Targaryen war idea, now given the punchy title, House of the Dragon. We have to talk about this, Hollywood Reporter. I know you're saying nice things about it. I'm not sure House of the Dragon is punchy. Chat, what do you think? Is House of the Dragon a punchy title for this? Because I keep forgetting what the heck it's called. I keep thinking it's Matt Smith, Doctor Who, sitting on a throne, and that there's a lot of blonde people involved. But I can't remember. It's like something about...
It does sound like a B tier kung fu movie.
House of the Dragon. Yeah, it's a lost Bruce Lee feature. Anyway, I wouldn't describe it as punchy. This is kind of a segue. But, you know, it's fine. It's interesting because House of the Dragon, isn't the Dance of the Dragons? Isn't that a better title? I know it's one of the books in Game of Thrones, so maybe they're concerned about that. But Dance of the Dragons seems like something that would be easier. Tiny Trifle says House of Dragons sounds lazy. I tend to agree. Title is good. We got an okay emoji. Okay. Yeah, I don't think the title is bad. We've got a vote for Punchy. Easy to remember, maybe. Matt Smith is a blonde baddie. Yes, I think that's the name of the show in my head. Although I do tend to call him Doctor Who. Matt Smith really puts me off, to be honest. Yeah, I think Doctor Who might be his best role, but I'm willing to give it a shot. House of the Dragon doesn't make sense. Too confined to space. Yeah, I think we're only talking about Targaryens here, folks. All I got is Doctor Who on a throne from the trailers. I think House of the Dragon is a forgettable title. I tend to agree. House of Dragons, isn't it? I honestly don't know. Isn't it? House of the Dragon is what it said here, but that might be early in production.
I'm not sure Game of Thrones is a particularly great title either, but it worked out. I mean, as to the title aspect, at least.
Oh, I think Game of Thrones is evocative. I really like the title Game of Thrones, but Song of Ice and Fire would have been good too. I think they just didn't want it to sound super fantasy-y. Houses and Dragons, typical GOT. Very true. All right. The second critical piece of the creative team was Sapochnik. The Emmy-winning director helmed some of the most acclaimed and difficult episodes of Thrones, such as Hard Home, Battle of the Bastards, and The Winds of Winter. Sapochnik's talent was almost legendary on the throne set, with the director having endured 11 weeks of consecutive night shoots during a freezing Northern Ireland winter while retaining a preternaturally sharp command of the cast and crew, all to deliver the sad, long night episode in which plots don't make sense and you can't see much of anything, which I feel bad. I feel bad.
Let's just film it. Let's just film it with a lens cap on.
Natural lighting. Natural lighting was the election for that, and I don't know whether that was the right choice. But Sapochnik is very good, and I think his name is known among Game of Thrones fans, or at least people that follow the series. So this is designed to say we've got a super fan, we've got Martin back, Sapochnik's taking over. What's not to love about all of this? And don't let your lying eyes deceive you if you've already watched the trailer. As a kind of piece here. Sapochnik was, to put it mildly, reluctant to get pulled back into the world of Westeros. Miguel said, "I'm never doing Thrones again." Condal recalls. Once again,
then HBO says, "Have you considered money?"
Yes. What if we wrote a check? Once again, a fortuitous relationship played a key role. Sapochnik was already friends with Condal and had already agreed to help develop Dragon, giving guidance as somebody who knew the original show's secret sauce. Along the way, Sapochnik gradually became entwined with the project. We roped him in. We just got him in the room and said, "You're directing this, right?" "No." "Yes, you are." Sapochnik met with Blois, and the executive had a key question. "What would you do directorially?" Sapochnik recalls replying, "If it ain't broken, don't fix it." And Casey said,
premise.
Well, he's the director. His direction is okay. I think season 8 had been divisive. Blood Moon hadn't worked out for them, and they wanted to retain their fans. This is the only time you actually see this in this article, I think. We're going to talk about this divisiveness, but we're not going to call it divisive. So Sapochnik says, hey, season 8 didn't work, did it? They wanted to come back to what they knew. With Sapochnik on board, Condal would focus on the scripts and Sapochnik on directing the pilot and episodes 6 and 7. So this is a 10-episode series, so that's like an interesting choice. I would expect big things in 6 and 7.
Will we actually get all 10 episodes? Or will we only get 3 and then it'll be done?
We'll get 10. It's in the can. They
just because it's in the can doesn't mean we'll get all 10. There's been plenty of shows with episodes in the can that never got seen.
I don't think HBO has ever done that. I don't think HBO has ever held back on it because they've always been a pay service. So I think we'll get all 10. Okay. They ordered this to series without a pilot. After just canceling the one with the $30 million pilot. Like, I don't know what's happening in the back rooms of HBO, but it's interesting. With Sapochnik on board, Condal would focus on the scripts. We got the pilot in episode 6 and 7. Both worked on the show's broad story and editing. The idea was to emulate Benioff and Weiss's tight partnership that had been so effective in managing the day-to-day decision tornadoes of an immense production. I don't have any problem with people working together on this kind of stuff. The first year of work, we refused to take separate meetings. It was a good way for us to get to know each other. So when we started to take meetings separately, we were able to take a bit of each other into them, and we were more in each other's head. All of this is good process type stuff. When HBO ordered House of the Dragon in October 2019, Benioff and Weiss, by then at Netflix with a massive overall deal.
What isn't 3 years ago at this point?
What isn't covered is Benioff and Weiss getting unceremoniously dumped by Star Wars and Disney in between these deals. Emailed Condal and Sapochnik congratulations and best wishes, but otherwise stuck to their decision to move on and to skip all conferences or cons that they've otherwise agreed to appear at to talk about what happened. Instead of shooting a pilot for Dragon, HBO opted to go straight to series. It was a daring move, considering that the 2 previous attempts to film a debut episode of a series based on Martin's work had failed. The original unaired pilot for Thrones required a nearly top-to-bottom reshoot and is locked in that HBO dungeon next to Blood Moon. It is the stuff of legends, how bad the original pilot for Game of Thrones was. So we'll see. Orsi says it was the combination of Condell's writing, Sapochnik's experience, and Martin's enthusiastic support that boosted HBO's confidence in the project. Plus, the clock was ticking. The company was preparing to launch its do-or-die streaming service, HBO Max, and could really use some Thrones magic. Now, they've premised all of this on it was just so good we had to order it to series. The real reason is right here, right? So even in fluff pieces, you can read between the lines and you can figure out what's going on. They've got a streaming service to sell, and they didn't have what they wanted to use to sell it. I put a lot of pressure on everybody for this to happen as soon as humanly possible, says Greenblatt, who emphasizes that Blois made the decision to greenlight and is the network's expert on the franchise. We all knew that Disney Plus launched with The Mandalorian. We didn't have any big piece of IP that would be ready, but at least we'd have Dragon coming down the pipe, and that would be important to the world at large. They think highly of themselves, don't they? And I couldn't think of a better piece of IP almost anywhere that deserved to be developed and multiplied. Certainly not Marvel or Star Wars. Now Condell and Sapochnik just had to make a series out of Dragon that could actually fly and somehow get everything right on the first try. And I think they actually moved what I had read before into part 2, so we'll just follow it along. So they divided this into parts because they have magazines to sell. But this is, I think, where we must get into some of the quotes about the end of the season. That's all I'm going to pull here. A lot of this part of the story is talking about like the summaries and what they're aiming for in this new series. We don't need to go over what is essentially their PR package here, but I did want to capture the discussion of how they felt about the end of the original Game of Thrones. But they are talking a lot about what this is going to be about, a family running for the throne. They also mentioned that this is going to be about, I think, the patriarchy of Westeros. And being against women in the country, which admittedly Game of Thrones is kind of about. And then, yeah, I'm just going to find this. And I apologize, folks. I didn't realize that they had split it into 2 parts when I was putting this together. I read it all before we did this. Let's see here.
We love you, Rich.
Oh, no, it's okay. Kurt, you got anything to add while I find this?
None in particular.
Are you excited about House of the Dragon?
I am not, sir. No. I have HBO Max because it came with my internet bundle for free.
Nice.
And I'm not sure that I'll be watching it, but okay.
You're gonna tune in now. You've seen all this. You're very interested. All right. So they put it at the end of part 2. How many viewers will show up for Dragon is a question that everybody is highly curious about. Thrones opened to a mere 2.2 million viewers. By the way, in the year 2022, that is not an awful final score, period, since everybody is so split up at this point. In the U.S., and concluded with 19.3 million overnight viewers across all platforms. Note that I don't think they're comparing the same numbers here. It's 2.2, I think, live viewing. And then by the time it finishes a decade later, they're doing overnights here to make this bigger.
There are plenty of YouTube channels that churn out better numbers than that, which is sad.
All right, now you see, I'm feeling the shade is. I've never had anything with 2.2 million views. I didn't
say us. I'm just saying that there are plenty of YouTube channels that with 2. Well, if you look at subscribers or viewers, or there's a lot of YouTube channels that are succeeding better.
Well, I'm sure they're spending 30 million on their pilots, right? Anyway,
yeah.
HBO is prepared to greenlight a second season of Dragon very quickly after the show's debut if the ratings are high enough. The network naturally won't specify a number, but Orsi says, I don't think anybody is thinking this show will pick up from a ratings perspective right where Thrones left off. Wise business people, you're probably not getting 20 million in the overnight on this new show. Hanging over the premiere is lingering chatter about the blowback against Thrones Season 8. It's another irony for the pile that the same show responsible for Dragon being so hugely anticipated, objection, facts not in evidence, is also a source of hand-wringing about its reception. The effing toxic internet and these podcasts out there saying that Season 8 left such a bad impression that people say, oh, I'm never going to watch them again, Martin says. I don't trust them
Wow,
anymore.
they really wrote that?
Oh,
I thought
yeah.
you were just making a mockery. I thought you were just doing a thing there for a
No,
second. I
I'm
actually
reading it
wrote that
right
down.
out of the article. George R. Martin says, "Screw the fans."
The toxic internet.
The toxic internet.
The toxic
and
internet that just
podcast.
the toxic internet that didn't like your show.
Oh, well,
They
we
loved your
haven't
show.
gotten-
This is the thing. It's like, was it toxic? Was it also toxic when they loved your show and it was the greatest thing ever and they couldn't get enough of it? Was it also toxic in
Wasn't
seasons 1, 2,
Daenerys-
3, and 4 when they loved your show? Is it toxic for Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, where the internet collectively loves the show and thinks that they're doing great? Is it still toxic, or is it only toxic when the people are like, we don't like this as much? So it's only toxic when they're telling us things we don't want to hear.
Tell me how you really feel, Kurt. I haven't even gotten to the good quote yet.
We love the internet and we love all the social media. I mean, Game of Thrones, as much as any other show, and perhaps more than arguably any in recent memory, was very driven by social media, driven by blogs, and I mean, even more than Breaking Bad, even more than Better Call Saul. It probably is in a league above.
It had a lot of what Lost had driving it.
It had a lot of the culture. It had serious cultural zeitgeist going on. It was infectious in a way, and people loved it. And I'm sure that the creators of, Game of Thrones were just super thrilled that everyone was just loving their show and consuming their every word. Yum, yum, yum. We want more because of how great it is. And then they're like, wait a second, we don't like this. Oh my God, it's that toxic, misogynistic, hate-filled, transphobic, white supremacist patriarchy internet.
No, they don't use any.
They're saying it. They're implying it.
Now, Kurt, we have to go with what's on the page.
No, I don't.
They're not putting that on the page right now. They do have a little bit more to add, though, from the actual creative force at HBO, Casey Bloys. It was a social media backlash, not of real people. So Martin's upset. Martin doesn't like to be dumped on. I can't actually blame him as a person for that, but as we just put up on the screen, a lot of that is, it would have been better if they had your material. You're the guy, and you won't help. It was a social media backlash. Bloys says, sounding weary of the subject. I think in multiple parts of our society, we are reminding ourselves that Twitter is not real life.
That much is for sure true. Twitter is definitely not real life. That is for sure.
We knew it was going to be divisive. And of course, you want all fans to be happy, but that's never going to happen. There weren't a lot of people
making all the fans happy is impossible, but having like a lot of people who like your stuff seems to be possible if you just have a good enough product.
There weren't a lot of people walking around despondent or upset. It's a take that reads well, but probably doesn't fully reflect viewer feelings. Now, here's what they do in this statement, right? So this is offensive to me at a certain level, but I understand the rhetoric, which is essentially you take the truism that anything you make, anything you put out there, not everyone is going to be happy about it. Not everyone is going to be pleased. You also take the truism that anything that any one person says, whether it's in a newspaper in real life or on a Twitter post or a social media blog or what have you, isn't going to fully reflect everything that everybody is thinking about that given situation. That, however, cannot extrapolate out to, thus, none of it counts.
None of it counts, yeah.
Everything else in the real world, everybody is happy, or we please some folks, or that anybody anywhere thinks that it was a sufficient conclusion to the series that you had built. So we ignore the premise, and this is actually what I find the most problematic here. They buried it a little bit. It's the end of part 2, as it turns out. This reads as denial and hubris, and exactly the kind of thing that you don't want to see from these creators going forward and making new content, right? What you want to see, at least what I want to see, and so I guess I'm editorializing here, is we're reflecting on that. Obviously, that one got away from us. We still think there's a lot of good ideas there. We are very respectful of the thousands of people that built those sets, and we think we put some images on screen that nobody has ever seen before. Obviously, it didn't resonate with our whole audience, and we are determined to make this next project work for even more of you. Not falling on your sword until you're dead, just a light pinprick that says, you know what? We know there was an issue. Instead, we get the guy that's apparently leading things behind the scenes now with his millions and millions of dollar contract saying, well, those idiots don't know what's good and I don't trust them anymore. And the head of the studio saying that was Twitter. It's just Twitter.
Was it just Twitter when they were loved? This is the thing, though. Was it just Twitter when they loved you?
Well, here's what's really interesting about a fluff piece, right? This is why I like reading these, because you can still get good content out of it. Hollywood Reporter knows that this isn't right. Hollywood Reporter understands that it was worse than this. So they can't brook it entirely without losing some of their credibility on a fluff piece. So they have the next paragraph. This is them saying, to be fair, it's not difficult to find Thrones fans in real life who are also critical of the ending. So like they immediately go, yeah, we know. We know. We know those paragraphs are BS. Look, we know. Yet it seems highly likely that viewers who love the original series and Martin's books will feel compelled to check out the new show too. Like this is HBO and Hollywood Reporter.
I'm not sure they're going to feel compelled. They might at best be curious and perhaps deceptively hopeful that maybe this will be different. But compelled, there was compelled in early seasons of Game of Thrones. I think that time is over now.
Yeah, it was can't miss viewing. It was like literally appointment TV, and maybe the last appointment TV that I can remember like doing. And then it just kind of fell apart. But yeah, I love this sequence in this article because you totally get the journalistic side of things against the, hey, we're actually just a commercial fluff piece side of things. And then they get this, and it's like, we have to put that in. You said these things to us. This has to go in the article. And HBO's like, all right. And then Hollywood Reporter says,
I mean, you can discount all of Twitter if you like, but go to real life conventions, go to real life places where Game of Thrones fans are.
It's self-evident.
Ask them. It's like, are you going to get that much of a difference opinion? I mean,
go to the San Diego Comic-Con when the panel shows up. And you've got lists of things they can't ask, and they cancel the questions and answers, and the people boo. I mean,
that's not real life. That's not real life. The San Diego Comic-Con, when people show up, and that's not real life.
Those were human beings. They were. Now, Dan and Dave might not know that because they unceremoniously canceled their appearance like the day of, because they didn't want to go to talk about their series, or the fact that there apparently was a behind the scenes like they did for every other episode of Game of Thrones for the finale that mysteriously vanished into the HBO vault. Who knows what they say in that thing? But I love this sequence, and I love these kinds of articles for pulling out this kind of stuff. Now, I actually really think they did a good job showing about how the process works, whether you like it or you don't. I don't tend to like what HBO described as their process there in that first part, but this stuff, man, I couldn't love it more. It's like, you feel like they're saying their true feelings here a little bit, but maybe in the dark of night, in their own bedroom, when they really think about it, they know Game of Thrones season 7, realistically.
That's the people who acted on the show, what they think about it. I've seen some of their red carpet interviews. I think I know what their thoughts are.
The actors know. And then we've got a bunch more in development. Get excited. And I think that's basically the end of the article. It's the end of what I want to talk about with y'all. So yeah.
I mean, I hope on some level any sort of skepticism is misplaced.
Of course.
This will wind up being a fantastically wonderful fantasy show that we can all escape into, and it will serve every dream we ever had. If it turns out to be the first 4 seasons of Game of Thrones, then great, fantastic. And then we'll have something that we all love, and they managed to learn from their mistakes, and we have a great property. So I hope they're able to accomplish all that. So we'll see.
I would love it. That's the thing, right? I'm very critical of these things because I like to look at things critically. I find that to be a piece of art in of itself. And so I enjoy that process. That's where postmortems come from. I do it in the house. My wife can attest to this, maybe in chat. I do postmortems on basically everything. So they just don't appear on YouTube all the time. But yes, at the end of the day, I would very much like for this to be awesome. Why? Because I want everything to be awesome. I would love Rings of Power to be awesome. I would love House of the Dragon to be awesome. I would love Mandalorian season 3 to be awesome.
I love Star Wars to be awesome.
I would love Star Wars to be awesome again. But it's still worthwhile to look at these things and go, there's some interesting things in those comments. There are some interesting things that are suggestive of a group that maybe didn't self-reflect entirely enough on what happened a few years ago, or else this could have been the golden goose that never stopped laying eggs if you land that plane with the original series, because bad spin-offs, you can throw in the bin. But if you have that mainline spine that everybody continues to adore, Disney has shown this. You can make crap for as long as you want. And if you have the branding and if you have the music and if you have the logo, that's still going to be loved by certain people. And you're going to survive the folks that all admit that, Book of Boba Fett was a trash fire, right? Like, I don't know anybody that really loves Book of Boba Fett. Maybe there's somebody out there, somebody will come into the comments and be like, Book of Boba Fett was my favorite. More power to you. I'm not trying to take that away. But that when you look at these things, if you've got the spine of things that somebody loves, then you can make anything that you want. Disney trilogy didn't kill Star Wars forever, assuming they right the ship, because Star Wars still exists. And if Game of Thrones had
to be partially sympathetic, I suppose, in some sense, I understand partially frustration from the artists and the creatives, because creating is hard.
Of course it is
hard. The amount of things that succeed is minimal. Most things fail. Most things never make it to a pilot. A lot of pilots fail. A lot of shows fail. Even TV shows that are successful, finding shows that are breakthrough successes is obviously rare on a curve. And so I can imagine it would be frustrating, because I've experienced this to some limited degree, as you're trying to create and things sometimes aren't working, and for whatever reason, and that can be a bit frustrating. And so maybe there's some sympathy there on some level.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I do hear that, and we want more and better things out there in the universe. And there's the 90-10 rule. Most things are going to be bad, but you still get those Breaking Bad. You still get those Better Call Sauls. You still get those Stranger Things 4s out of the process of being willing to try, right? So we want people to try. ADC, sorry, did the trial take place there because servers, or more because Adept wanted softer anti-slap and the server being there just made it possible? The server for the Washington Post. I think he thought he wouldn't get a fair trial in Hollywood, I would guess. And so they were looking for jurisdictions.
Yeah, I mean, you could have sued in California because you have personal jurisdiction there. So that would have been fine. But they have the anti-slap laws. Well, the anti-slap law is a lot harder in California, so it would make it more likely to get dismissed than in Virginia. Yeah. So
there you go. Annette Matz, have you heard that Kit Harington is working on a sequel called Snow? I have. It's at the end of that article as well. I think that sounds like the worst thing. Although Kit Harington has not had the breakout success that he would have hoped for coming out of Game of Thrones as one of the main characters. I don't know if you saw him in the Eternals, but he wasn't well used. So hopefully he can find some success. I don't know. He seems to act much the same way as Jon Snow in all cases. And so I think it's hard to separate him from that character. So maybe this will work better for him. A cat, not a zebra, had a horrible day. This was exactly what I needed. XX. Thank you, Cat, not a zebra. We're here to have fun, especially on Casual Fridays, talking about random things, Game of Thrones, HBO, studio policies,
creative,
having a great time.
Creating,
I love these Fridays.
Getting out there and creating, realizing it's going to suck. Hopefully you get better.
Yeah. Well, and just by happenstance, you put out a lot of things. Something gets popular. You learn what you do good. It's great. Barney Cat. Ooh, Stack of Thrones. Cat. It's early on a Friday, Cat. Happy Friday. Purple heart emoji. Emily and her lawyer nerds finding us wherever we go.
That's nice. I always appreciate the purple heart from the Emily crew.
Britt Cormier, tell me a good story. That is all I want. If you watch The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, you have a great story that takes twists and turns, but none of those TNT are, oh my God, where did that come from? That's exactly right. To me, if you're going to subvert, if you're going to have a twist, your job has to be that after that subversion and twist, you can reflect on the story that you were told and it makes sense. That's a subversion. Oh, of course there's a red wedding. Of course X, Y, or Z happens when you watch Game of Thrones when it works. Anything else that subverts expectations. When it is cobbled together seemingly for the sole purpose to subvert, as a certain writer by the initials of R&J does for everything that he does, then you can actually figure out what the story is in reverse. Right? If you go watch Knives Out and just assume that the writer is trying to subvert every expectation you have in all instances, you will have the answer to that plot 5 minutes into the movie, as I did. I can tell you, Papa Hoeg watched me do this because I said, I'm just assuming Rian Johnson wants to subvert everything that I believe about anything, and the entirety of that movie is immediately obvious. Yeah. And so if you just take that assumption, then you're no longer subverting. And that's the problem. You subvert when the story allows you to in a manner that makes sense with the characters and the plots and the world that you've put together. And if you just do it mechanically because you're so nefarious, everything falls apart. And I don't hate Knives Out. I think it's got a lot of kind of goofiness and things in it that makes some a pretty enjoyable entertainment experience. I think Rian Johnson is a good director. I say good things about Rian Johnson a lot. I think, he directed Ozymandias, which is one of the best television episodes of all time.
Was pretty solid.
And we can give credit for that but also saying, look, he's got a tick, and he wants to subvert everything all the time, and it gives away everything.
But he didn't write it.
No, he didn't write Ozymandias. Well, that's the dream, right? I'll take a Rian Johnson directorship of a new Star Wars. He can direct one if he wants. But no, don't write it. I don't want JJ writing anything either. Annette Matz, the whole point of subverting high fantasy with how politics and power and love and family actually work in reality. That's why there were so many historical references. Yeah, it's War of the Roses. And that's why normies loved it. Well, that's why people that don't necessarily grapple with fantasy loved it, right? And then they kind of, like a boiling frog or just an infinity pool kind of concept, get into, oh, those eggs are dragons now. All right. Oh, did that shadow baby assassinate one of the kings? That was weird.
Yeah.
And like all of that stuff. But yes, George R. R. Martin rolls in. I think you can see articles that he wrote back in the day about how Lord of the Rings was too clean and everybody was too high fantasy-esque. And
And there's that great on the epic rap battles where they're both Tolkien versus Martin. And where in the rap battle, he just says, it's called fantasy. It's supposed to be unrealistic. So the fact that everyone's dreams come true, and the fact that everyone, that we save the princess, and it's like, yeah, it's fantasy. It's supposed to be unrealistic, you asshole. So yeah. But on that,
I will check that out.
I do also like what Game of Thrones does, because in rooting it in a historical reality, it makes it more true, because the world historically is full of violence and horror and torture and pain and everything. And so like the way the characters behave, and the way that life is treated is cheap, and the way that is very true to the human condition.
And the books have a lot more about
in a lot of ways.
The books have a lot more about how like the common citizenry is essentially just constantly getting trampled upon by the Godzillas of these houses. And like, it's much more,
which is also very true to reality.
Yeah. It's much more focused on that than the HBO show is, which is fine, because you can't cover like everything that a huge novels can cover in these kinds of things. But yeah, it's fine. But my wife, co-counsel, would say that she dislikes Game of Thrones because there's fundamentally no one to root for. And that bothers her.
No, I can understand that. Like, you have no one to cheer for. That's okay. That makes sense.
And I don't think that's wrong. Sutara-kun Niamiwatz. I covered this one. She's still in that unaired pilot. Someone will have to break into the HBO vaults. Don't break into vaults, people. To go see Blood Moon. Britt Cormier, how many YouTube channels launched on the back of Game of Thrones? From review to fan fiction to theories. Were they toxic then? Mm-hmm. Yeah, Game of Thrones has a big old community, much like Star Wars, of people covering it.
It's not toxic when they love us, right?
Well, it's all marketing. It's all good. And I think to a point, even criticism is good. But yeah, I think they want to express people didn't really hate season 8 of Game of Thrones. We won the Emmy for best drama that year. Should have been in that quote, because that's my favorite stat ever. Game of Thrones season 8, best drama that year.
And just because the fans want something, of course, doesn't mean the creative should give it to them either. Like, that's part of the issue of being an artist as well. It's like, you need to be true to your own art and giving the audience what they want. Well, sometimes the audience doesn't know what they want, so that's a problem. And then even if they do know what they want, sometimes it's not what you want to do as an artist. So again, I feel some sympathy to the creators behind this. I don't know whether or not when they were writing season 8, they thought that they were writing something great or not, or they just felt they had no choice, or what the problems exactly were internally. But I'll give some sympathy while I'll note that the product didn't work. And that people noting the product didn't work is not toxicness. It's just, well, the product didn't work.
Yeah. Tim Riggs, fundamental problem with the entertainment industry. Talk about gamers, viewers, audience. Completely ignore the reality. They are customers. Well, this is the constant push and pull that Kurt was just mentioning when you're talking about consumer art, right? Because art at a fundamental level is really only going to be fantastic if the creatives are doing what they want to do and making what they want to make. But kind of bending to the whims of who might otherwise purchase, engage, or be sold advertisements to that art makes certain things possible and not possible in a lot of instances. and it can discount what the value of that art can be. So it's kind of like, do you want them to just go and make their own thing, which sometimes can feel what I usually describe as up its own ass, and not terribly reflective of what the market might otherwise like, with the chance that if you get 10 of those, one of them might really work for you? Or do you want them to commercialize a little bit, right? The MCU is a commercial property, but that doesn't mean Endgame isn't awesome when the portal's open, right? I mean, like, there are things that commercial properties can still do. They are customers. They're trying to get cheeks in seats in those particular situations. And there's a fine line, right? I'm a video gamer, right? People know that, Virtual Legality. I love indie games. I love checking out what the weirdos are making, the 3-person teams. There's a game I'm playing this week that is one of the highest rated of the year, kind of strangely. I'm still trying to figure out exactly why, called Stray, which is a game about you being a cat. And when I say this specifically, it's you tipping things off of shelves and you laying in sun places and lying down and scratching at rugs. But it's also a game about a cat that is in a post-apocalyptic robot-led city in the future. So that's not something that you get greenlit for 4-quadrant appeal.
Yeah.
That isn't something that you get a $30 million pilot about, right? But we do have publishers in video games that say, that sounds weird. And as it turns out, that particular game, Stray, is going to make them a fortune. But why? I couldn't tell you. I don't think that they were driven by commercial concerns when they chose what they chose for this particular game, other than the fact that I would be willing to bet the developers really like cats and otherwise like science fiction.
One of the nice things about the internet, of course, and mass media is it makes it a lot more possible for you to find customers, because now there is not the gatekeepers that you used to have. So your ability as a creative to just be creative and potentially find audiences that will respond to your creativity with none to minimal artistic compromise is a lot more possible. Now, this may not necessarily mean that you're going to be able to have, $40 million for pilots, but you can, if you are good, create some sort of success for yourself. So, one of the nice things, I suppose, about modern social media and modern technology is the ability that you and I, for example, can have channels and create things, and people seem to like it. And so that's good.
Yeah, and I don't have to understand it. Right. One of the other things that I tell people that I get a lot more questions now, especially after we pass 100,000, where people view me as a success about, what am I doing? How am I moving towards the market and all these things? And I say, at the end of the day, mostly I'm making things that I'm interested in, trying to be proud of everything I put out there, and we see what happens. But like yesterday, right, I didn't do a video on Coinbase and an insider trading scandal because I saw it trending. I knew when I was making it, this is going to be a lower and more specific kind of audience for that. But I love that I made it. I feel good about the research I put into it and explaining what was happening there. And I'm really proud of that video being out there.
And we're all smarter for it.
Well, I mean, that's the dream, right? and so that's all I ever do is let's try to put something up that I'm proud of. And sometimes it catches on and sometimes it doesn't. But being happy about it every time makes it so that I want to do it the next time. So yeah.
And we appreciate every single one of you who's there in the chat and participating. And of course, every one of you who is subscribed to Richard's channel. So if you see a red subscribe button, it is because the red subscribe button is angry. It feels anger, but it doesn't want to feel anger. It wants to be a nice, calm, peaceful, gray subscribe button. And you can help. Merely by clicking the red subscribe button, it will become calm, integrated, peaceful, self-contained subscribe button. You can be the change in the world. Hit that red subscribe button today.
It says, thank you very much for that, Kurt. I would have done it wrong. I would have assumed it started gray and became red when you subscribed, but that would probably be wrong for like psychological marketing. They want it to be bold and obvious.
And I've written a narrative.
I love it.
You just saw me deliver about the.
I think it should be a children's book.
Yeah, there you go.
The red subscribe button.
Red subscribe button. The red subscribe button. The red subscribe button is angry. The red subscribe button is sad. It does not want to feel these feelings. It wishes to be calm. You can help. Be the change we want to see in the world.
I want to say I love this comment from Shining Armor. Just because a majority feel one way doesn't make them right. 100%. Loved the Game of Thrones ending. Only freedom fighter who made a good leader was Mandela. Talking about one specific plot point in the ending. More power to you, by the way. And more power to you in the face of a lot of people that are pretty animated about not liking it, right? There's a ton of things that I like that a lot of people hate. And there's a ton of things that I don't like that a lot of people do. And it's always good to reflect on your own thoughts on these things. They are subjective. Art is subjective. And if you liked it, I am thrilled for you. I've always said this online and on Twitter and elsewise. I would rather be in the shoes of someone that loved something, even if the whole world hated it, because I don't care about the whole world in that instance. I loved it. So that's fantastic for me. So if you loved it, that is fantastic. And thank you for the super chat on this stream where I have said bad things about this finale that you love. But I really appreciate that. I really appreciate that perspective. And like I said, more power to you. I hope you're looking forward to the new show. Annette Matz became a YouTube member. Thank you so much, Annette. I appreciate it. And Tim Riggs says, I mean how they treat criticism. And I don't know what we're referring to. See if I can build this back up. See if I can build this back up.
I'm going to assume that we're referring to how the article / HBO refers to how they're treating criticism by dismissing it and basically saying it's all just, hate and vileness and all the rest of it with the implied misogyny.
Yeah, I see. I get what he's saying here, right? Because he's talking about the usefulness here, and I went off on a tangent about commercial art. And he's saying that when they treat criticism, it's always like there's some unrelated entity that happens to enjoy their product when they are, in fact, the consumers of those products. I agree with that, Tim. I think that oftentimes creators, as Kurt rightly says, it's a struggle because they're trying to make something that speaks to them at the same time, but they are often dismissive of what are legitimate concerns. And you get this kind of circling of wagons of, oh, it's toxic, because I'm positive you can go and you can find somebody that hated Game of Thrones season 8 that did not treat people as if reasonable minds can differ, that did not go out on the internet with their best behavior hat on and treated this as a constructive criticism for a difficult season to get through, and instead maybe called somebody involved a name. I don't know. There might be corners of the internet that sometimes, I don't know if you can believe this either, Kurt, sometimes call people names and otherwise outright attack people as people.
I have noticed some, what I at least perceive to be toxicity from time to time. Yes.
Oh, so it's possible that happens. But as we talk about a lot in Virtual Legality, I am never in favor of people dismissing one another's thoughts, ideas, concepts, philosophies, or whatever by attaching that opposite side to whatever the worst actor in that group that shares that idea might have, right? That is always going to be possible, especially on the internet, for you to go and find somebody behaving badly and say, you're with these people. You can do that on every side of every question, of whether important or not. And it's not useful to reasonable.
The other, you're the other.
Yeah, you other folks, by saying, these bad people are on your side. How do you feel about that? I feel badly about that. Thank you. I don't know. Why do you bring that up? But I'm not that person. And I would never advocate for that. I can say season 8 is a trash fire for reason X, Y, and Z. And you can go watch hour-long postmortems where I do just that. But I'm not attacking D&D necessarily, although I think they were lazy and just wanted to get out of there with a big check in their pocket. But I can also say the actual content, the product suffered, and here's why. And I think that is useful. Apple Pie, thank you for becoming a member. Greetings from Eorzea.
Thank you for hitting that beautiful join button.
Appreciate it. And I think that's about going to do it for us today.
Excellent.
We're talking for a couple hours on random nonsense. I really do like
beautiful start to my morning.
You guys are all fantastic. Go check out Kurt's channel, Uncivil Law. Apologies, Kurt, that I actually just saw the invite to your stream this morning when I was setting up. So I apologize for that. And have a great one, everybody. Have a great Friday. If you do have tips for headlines that you think might be good to cover, DM me at Twitter at Hoeg Law. And also, if you've got anything that is kind of random and you think would make a good casual Friday stream, you don't have to wait for Friday for that. I pulled this article from, I think, Tuesday or Wednesday because I wanted to talk about what I want to talk about. And so if you see something interesting, I still haven't talked about random accusations that Baby Yoda is a copy of Gizmo, the original Mogwai. That might come up at some point in the future. I love that article because it's so random.
Doesn't strike me as obvious, but okay.
Send that out. I think it's primarily a joke, but I also wanted to talk about how messaging kind of becomes viral, because you can tell from the kind of sequence that is had in this interview that he's being sarcastic, and then it comes out as like a headline everywhere, like director of Gremlins attacks Baby Yoda, and I was like, interesting. It's interesting when you watch these things filter through, because you only then get the headline and you don't see the anyway. So we might cover that. on a future Casual Friday. But if you have anything, send it. Very cool. Lawyers and Dragons is going to be a thing. If you didn't see my Twitter, we're going to have a planning phone call. Kurt, we're going to get you involved.
Thank you.
And everything else is going to be just fine here on Friday, July 22nd. Everybody have a great one. And I'll see you on the next episode of Virtual Legality, Hangouts and Headlines, or anything else we wind up doing here. Stay tuned.